Hello everyone, this is Richard Espinoza and welcome to YO2A Arsenal Roundup News. We are your Second Amendment source to keep you informed on the importance of your Second Amendment rights and what is going on in your state. And we keep you informed on legislations and possible infringements towards your Second Amendment rights. And so whether it be in the great state of Wyoming or in any parts of the United States, I will keep you informed and I will read you some legislations that will either be favorable or unfavorable. Whether if they're justified or unjustified, I will bring it to your attention. And that is part of my job, to help you be informed and be alert, because united we stand, or divided we fall. Make your pick. Well, today I am going to read you a press release from my former state of California, from the California Rifle Pistol Association, from attorney Chuck Michel, who is the attorney for the California Rifle Pistol Association. Chuck Michel is an awesome lawyer. He is a ultimate bulldog when it comes to fighting for our Second Amendment rights. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he was also involved with the Howard versus Washington, D.C., as well as McDonald versus Chicago, and I believe he was also involved with Bruin. Chuck Michel is just a fantastic person. He really, really fights for our Second Amendment rights, and whenever injustice happens in the state of California, he is on there to fight. And he is deeply appreciative for what he does. And also, the state of California is getting help from other gun groups, such as the state of Wyoming, Gun Owners of Wyoming, the Virginia Defense League, Gun Owners of America. They're all joining into the fight against this injustice that's what's going on in my former state of California. Now, some of you may say, why do you care about California? Who cares about California? You might think that or say that, but let me remind you, just because you live in a red state doesn't mean it will stay red forever, because what affects one state will affect another. Because if you don't stay alert and you don't watch what happens, the big bad wolf could take over your state and violate your Second Amendment rights. So it's important that no matter where it is in the United States, everybody should know about it, because again, what affects one state will affect another. That is why we are the United States of America. We must stay united and never divided, because the gun control groups and these gun control nuts, they want us to be divided. And what's as important is that we all stay on the same page. I lived in a time when California was a pro-gun state. I know it sounds cliche, but there was a great man by the name of Bill Richardson, H.L. Bill Richardson, former state senator of California. He started the Gun Owners of America in 1976 with Larry Pratt, and Bill Richardson has been a ultimate bulldog in fighting for our Second Amendment rights, during the 1970s and beyond. He passed away in 2020, but he was a great, honorable man. And one of the reasons why Bill Richardson and Larry Pratt started Gun Owners of America was because they felt that the NRA was compromising. Now, I am a life member of the NRA, and I'm beginning to notice that. But even when Gun Owners of America started, it was then NRA Executive Vice President Harlan Carter stepped in and says, you know what? We are no longer going to be no compromise. We are going to correct the wrongs from the past and make it right. And Harlan Carter did so when he started with the NRA ILA. And Harlan Carter did everything he could to rebuild the NRA but sadly, unfortunately, Wayne LaPierre had weakened the NRA. I hate to say it, but he did. And I was very disappointed in the candidates he supported, especially, as I mentioned before, Mitt Romney, who's no friend of the Second Amendment, and he even supported John McCain against Barack Obama. You know, it doesn't matter if the person is Republican or Democrat. It all depends on where they stand. If neither the Republican or Democrat are not benefiting what is right for the Second Amendment, you always go for the independent party. That's what the NRA should have done, but didn't. And I was very disappointed in that. However, I believe that there is hope for the NRA. I believe that Doug Hamlin, who is the now new CEO and Executive Vice President for the NRA, I believe he will do a far better job than Wayne LaPierre, and I think that he will bring it back to respectability the same way Harlan Carter and Charlton Heston have. And even Eric Pratt, the director for Gun Owners of America, even agrees that Doug Hamlin is the right choice for the NRA. He believes that Doug Hamlin will turn the NRA around and make a tremendous comeback. I'm only hoping that will happen. I'm rooting them on. And I root on all our gun rights organizations because it shouldn't be a competition. We should be all in it together. And be united we stand. So it doesn't matter what gun organization you choose to be a member of. Remember, we should all be in it together. There should be no finger pointing. There should be no being better than the other. We need to be in it together. So now I am going to read you the press release from the California Rifle Pistol Association from Chuck Michel. And it says, when the Ninth Circuit sent Duncan versus Bonta skip back to 3-judge panel to send the case back to the same en banc panel that originally upheld the state's magazine ban. The die was cast that makes yesterday's decision far surprising. But as CRPA President and General Counsel Chuck Michel points out in the latest edition of CRPA TV, the decision does have its benefits. First, the case can now move to the Supreme Court, where it will be served as a perfect case to help clarify once and for all the proper application of the Bruin standard. Second, a host of cases have been struck behind Duncan, stayed pending this decision now that it can move forward. In this case, this is Boland versus Bonta, Rupert versus Becerra, Rhodes versus Becerra, and many others. But as we've been saying for months now, the Supreme Court must put an end to the gross misapplication of the Bruin standard. Anti-Sec 2A governments across the country continue to employ the friendliness of arguments, just as the Ninth Circuit has done in Duncan, to sidestep Bruin or in some cases simply dismiss it. As the heart of Duncan is the definition of arms, which the en banc panel twisted in this case to skirt around Bruin. Still, the majority opinion was bold enough to suggest that even if the standard capacity magazines were an arm covered by the Second Amendment, the state ban would fall within the nation's tradition of protecting the innocent persons. The verification dissenting the opinions in this case collapsed quite well in Judge Lawrence Van Dyke's video, escalated the state's argument, of course, but these fights will continue across the country until the Supreme Court weighs in. And for those of you, if you watched the recent episodes of Guns and Gadgets, Jarrett from Guns and Gadgets showed Judge Lawrence Van Dyke, who is a true rule of law judge, not an activist judge, but a true rule of law judge. He basically did a demonstration on how the firearm works, and it got the gun control nuts screaming bloody murder. And many activist judges were very upset for the demonstration that he did. He even has an AK-47 hung up in his chambers. But this is a rule of law judge who interprets the Constitution the way it is written. Because the Constitution says what it says and says what it means. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Unfortunately, the gun control groups and these Democrats and also Rhino Republicans, because I'm not going to cut the Republicans any slack, they just seem to not understand what that means. Shall not be infringed means shall not be infringed. You don't register a constitutional right and you don't put an infringement on a constitutional right. Because if you do, it defeats the purpose of us being the United States, and it defeats the purpose of us being free when you don't interpret the Constitution the way that it's written. So, this is why it's important that we stay alert and know what is going on. Because again, and I'll say it millions of times over again, what will affect one state will affect another. And again, if you live in a red state, don't take it for granted. Because I live here in Wyoming. We all know that Wyoming loves their guns. Wyoming is a pro-Second Amendment state. It's a true patriotic state. But the Wyomingites and many other Wyoming residents are fighting against Governor Mark Gordon for his injustice and for some laws that he is passing and refused to pass. So remember, the elections are coming up. The midterm elections are coming up next year. Mark Gordon better be ready, because people will be voting, and people do not forget. And that is why we have to hold our elected officials accountable. And that is why it's important to stay informed and know what goes on. And my job is to be your voice. Help me help you get the word out. So if there's an injustice that's going on in your state and you want it addressed, feel free to send me an email at RJ Espinoza, that's ESPINOZA .roundupnews@gmail.com. Make sure on the subject you put attention YO2A Arsenal Roundup News. Tell me what state you're from. Tell me about the bill, why it will affect your Second Amendment rights, so I can address it in the next episode. That's why I'm in this, because I want to be the voice for the people. And it's people like Jarrett from Guns and Gadgets, Mark Smith, John Crump, and many other gun rights activists. They encouraged me and inspired me to do this, because I eat, sleep, and breathe both the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. Those are the two most important parts of our Constitution, and without it, we have no freedom. That is why we must get involved and stay active. So whenever you are facing an injustice in your state, call your elected officials, no matter if they're Republican or Democrat, whether they're pro-gun or pro-gun control, don't matter. Make your voice heard. Because especially those who infringing upon your Second Amendment right, the more phone calls they get, the more they'll think twice before they pass a law that will infringe your rights. That is why we have the power to vote them out. That is why we have the constitutional right to vote and to get them out of office if they're violating our Second Amendment rights. Your voice is your weapon. Your vote is also your weapon. Let it be used. Well, that is it for tonight for YO2A Arsenal Roundup News. Again, I hope to see you again. And remember, please subscribe. But most importantly, send me your emails and tell me what are important to you and what bills that are either favorable or unfavorable in your state, and I will be sure to address it in the next episode. Until then, be armed, be vigilant, and be wise. Have a great day, my fellow Americans.